Hello, my favorite English language learners. It is your favorite English teacher here, Amy Joy. And in today's video, I'm going to teach you how to write a thoughtful and unique conclusion for a university paper. If you are struggling to write an introduction, feel free to click on the link in the description and watch my video on how to write an introduction for a university paper. But today we are going to be focusing on writing conclusions. So let's get started. So like I said, today we are going to be focusing on writing conclusions in university. And today's lesson is going to focus on the purpose of a conclusion, some mistakes that I see my students make when writing conclusions, and then I will give you some tips. I will give you 6 ingredients or building blocks to develop your conclusion that you can combine and kind of mix and match to make a conclusion that is really unique and more thoughtful than you might be currently writing now. So first of all, the purpose of a conclusion is to give your reader a sense of closure, to help your reader understand the importance of the issue that you're talking about. It will answer the question, so what, or why is this important? It will help your reader make connections to society or even to their personal life. And it will make the reader reconsider their view or popular views on the topic. Now, considering that these are the purposes of a conclusion, one of the biggest mistakes that I see my students make is simply summarizing each body paragraph. And this is one shortcoming of the 5-paragraph essay. So for example, my students will write a paper with a 3-point thesis, like my 3 favorite sports are baseball, basketball, and soccer. And then their body paragraph is about baseball, basketball, and then soccer. And then they just say, in conclusion, my 3 favorite sports are baseball, basketball, soccer. They give me nothing more. They give me nothing thought-provoking or meaningful. They are just simply giving me a laundry list of what their body paragraphs were and a sentence summary for each body paragraph. And I know that many students are trained to do this in tests like the TOEFL or maybe even the SAT, but this is not unique. This is not thoughtful. It does not serve the purpose of giving closure to your reader. So we really want to avoid simply summarizing what is in the body paragraphs because your reader has already read the body paragraphs. You want to give them something a little bit different and a little bit more meaningful. Another mistake I see my students make is stating the thesis for the very first time in their conclusion. And you might think that nobody does this or that you don't do this, but this actually happens because once my students have written their whole paper, they now know what their whole paper is about. And they have been trained to write a summary in the end. So their summary actually contains all of the ideas that went into writing the paper. So just be careful if you are writing your conclusion and you have a really nice summary that includes kind of everything. Make sure that you shouldn't just actually copy and paste that and put it as your thesis. I train my students to write a working thesis that can kind of change as the paper goes along. And oftentimes I suggest them to copy and paste the summary in their conclusion and actually make it their thesis statement. So that is another mistake I see my students make. Then another mistake I see is introducing new or supporting information in the conclusion. I call this the, oh, I forgot to mention conclusion. And in your conclusion, you should add something new, like a new perspective on the whole topic, but you should not add details or examples that you couldn't fit in the body of the paper. And I mainly see this mistake when the student has a certain focus on their paper, but maybe one of our readings had like a really interesting statistic, but the statistic is not really related to that focus of their paper, but they still try to include it because they liked it and they thought it was interesting. But I always tell them to leave it out of the conclusion since it is not relevant to the main point of their paper. So be careful not to add any extra or supporting information in your conclusion. And then the last common mistake that I see students make is being too cliche, being too emotional, or being unrealistic in their conclusions. So some students might end with unrealistic advice or like a fairy tale ending, like they lived happily ever after. And I'm like, this is not a Disney show. This is an academic paper. And when writing an academic paper, we should be realistic about any predictions that we make. All right, so now you know what not to do when writing a conclusion, but now I want to tell you what you should do when writing a conclusion. So here are 6 ingredients or building blocks to develop a more thoughtful and unique conclusion that serves the purpose we are trying to fulfill. So the first ingredient is to give a synthesis or a summary of your points. Yes, you can include a summary of the big topic you are talking about, but this summary should just be 1 to 2 sentences. And again, it should not be a laundry list of a summary of each body paragraph. It should really kind of cover all of them at the same time. So here is an example from a paper on blended families and divorce. It says, ultimately, as a result of an increasing divorce rate, blended families have joined nuclear families to become the new normal. While many people argue that living in an unconventional family structure might negatively affect children, research and anecdotal evidence suggest otherwise. So here we have 2 sentences that kind of broadly encapsulate all of the ideas that we have conveyed previously. Now, one thing I want to highlight about writing your little summary sentences at the beginning is to avoid using the phrase "in a nutshell." My students love this phrase, and I think it's because they feel maybe like a native speaker, like they know this kind of slang phrase, but this is really informal and it is not that academic. So if you are writing for an academic paper in university, I actually suggest using some other concluding signals or phrases. For example, ultimately, overall, clearly, based on the above research, based on the evidence, or as can be seen from the above research, evidence, etc. These phrases are much more academic and can actually create a better flow than just kind of abruptly signaling in a nutshell and then going on with your summary. Notice here, I didn't include some common phrases like in sum or in conclusion or to conclude. Those are okay too, but my students tend to know those and overuse those because they're the only ones that they know. So here I want to give you some ones that you might not have been taught before. All right, so that's ingredient number 1, giving a synthesis or summary of your points. And ingredient number 2 is answering the question, so what or why is this important? Again, this fulfills the purpose of the conclusion, telling your reader why your issue is significant and why what you have to say is important. So let's continue on with this conclusion about blended families and divorce. So the last sentence says, thus, it is important to normalize these new family structures so that each family can make decisions that are best for them without fear of social pressures or judgment. So some phrases to emphasize the importance of an issue include, this is important because, and you can simply just say why it's important. Or it is important too. What should we do? Thus, it is important to normalize these new types of families. And then some more questions you can ask yourself to think critically about your topic. You might think, who's affected by this? Who benefits from this? Who is this harmful to? What other issues or problems are related to this? And I will show you some more conclusions that include these questions later on in this presentation. But moving on to number 3, we have offering a new perspective. And again, this is one of the purposes of the conclusion, making your reader think differently about the topic that you are introducing them to. So again, with this same conclusion, we're just changing the last sentence. Now we say, therefore, instead of feeling sorry for blended families as broken homes, society should consider them as rebuilt, since everyone is making the best decision for their situation. So some useful structures to offer a new perspective include this first one using although. Although many, society, most people, the majority believes, thinks, views, sees, or perceives my paper topic in this way, they should see it this way. And another option, instead of viewing our paper topic in this normal way, society should view it in this new way that I am suggesting. So by using these language structures, you can get your reader to see your paper topic from your new and unique perspective. And ingredient number 4, we have looking to the future or making predictions. So let's read this conclusion one more time. Ultimately, as a result of the increasing divorce rate, blended families have joined nuclear families to become the new normal. While many people argue that living in an unconventional family structure might negatively affect children, research and anecdotal evidence suggest otherwise. Thus, it is important to normalize these new family structures so that each family can make decisions that are best for them without fear of social pressures or judgment. Once society changes their perspective on non-traditional households, more families will be able to make decisions that are best for them without fear of judgment or blame. So here you can see we're kind of combining all these building blocks, and this last sentence is looking to the future or making a prediction about what will happen if society kind of continues in this way. And the language structures that we might use for this are these kind of factual future conditionals. You can say if, when, or once X happens, Y will happen. So once society changes their perspective, more families will be able to make decisions that are best for them. But be careful. Don't be too cliche, emotional, or unrealistic. Like I mentioned before, when my students hear that they should be looking to the future, they get a little too optimistic, a little too hopeful, and they will say things like this. Once society changes the perspective, all families will be able to live harmoniously in the future. So some phrases to avoid being overly optimistic or a little cliche include words like all, or it will be perfect, or always, never, everyone, definitely. Those words are a little too absolute. And since we are writing an academic paper and not a Disney fairy tale, we need phrases to hedge or be more realistic to kind of soften our statements. So some words that can help you make a realistic prediction include perhaps, or eventually, or some, or many people instead of all people, or it is likely. So using phrases like this can help you make more realistic predictions. Instead of saying that something will definitely happen, we can say it'll likely happen. Or instead of saying that all people and all families will be living harmoniously, we could say that many families will be living harmoniously. And ingredient number 5, posing thoughtful questions. So let's read this conclusion here. It says, clearly, every family is as unique as the situation they are in. So instead of focusing on what we think a typical family should look like, we should ask ourselves, what is best for this family and their situation, and happily respect the answer. So here we are again kind of offering a new perspective by asking a thoughtful question. But again, something I want you to be careful of is don't ask questions that are too basic or too cliche or not necessarily relevant. For example, we see here, research and anecdotal evidence suggest otherwise. What type of family do you belong to? This question is like kind of out of place and it's not very thoughtful. It almost feels like my student didn't know how to end it, so they just decided to choose a random question about families and ask the reader. So if you choose to use ingredient number 5, make sure that it is thoughtful and actually makes the reader think about the issue kind of in a new way or in a new perspective, and doesn't just ask a random question to finish your paper for you. All right, and number 6, if you watched my introduction video, then you know that this is one of my favorite ways to actually end a paper as well, and that is echoing the introduction. So in my introduction video, we talked about an article called Modern Family, written by Susan Estrich, and she began her paper by mentioning the story of a bride walking down the aisle with her father and stepfather. And then this is what her conclusion says. No one ever said divorce was good for children, although sometimes it is the best option available. There we see a synthesis or summary of just all of the ideas. We did not get a laundry list of the body paragraph summaries. Then she says, but as two men showed, divorce does not have to destroy a family. It takes a big man to share his daughter's arm on that special day and a big man to raise a stepdaughter with love and attention. Congratulations to the bride and her fathers. God bless. So in your introduction, we see that story that she included about the bride walking down the aisle. And in the very ending, she echoes that. She repeats or alludes to that story, kind of re-mentioning it again. So I feel like echoing the introduction really serves that purpose of giving your reader closure, like, oh yes, I remember where I started and now I'm ending. And it really comes full circle. So that is why this method is so effective when writing your conclusions. So that is all of the ingredients we have. And I want to show you a few more sample conclusions so that you can see how we can put all of these different ingredients together. So here is a sample conclusion about a paper that is written about the Me Too movement. It says, the Me Too movement has raised awareness of the magnitude of the problem of sexual assault and harassment. However, the life of a hashtag is not long. Weeks will pass, hashtags will come and go, yet the trauma experienced by the survivors of this maltreatment will remain. Thus, in addition to our tweets of sympathy and support, what more can we do to make sure that not one more will have to say Me Too again? So in the first sentence, we see ingredient number 1, a short summary. Notice not every point is mentioned. We don't have 3 separate summary sentences for each body paragraph. Then we have ingredient number 2. It answers the question, who is impacted by this and so what? It says that survivors of maltreatment will remain. This issue affects the survivors of sexual assault and harassment. And then we used ingredient number 5, a thought-provoking question. So what can we do to make sure that not one more will have to say Me Too again? So this is a really nice and thoughtful question that gets the reader thinking about what can they do to help this situation. So it is thought-provoking, it's offering them a new perspective and making them really apply this situation to their own life. Here we have another sample conclusion, still about the Me Too movement, and it says, clearly the Me Too movement has had far-reaching effects across the globe, although primarily in the United States. It has shown how one group's discontentment can challenge the status quo and ignite a widespread movement. However, more interestingly, it has also shed light on the issue of freedom of speech and patriarchal political systems, which are 2 more obstacles society needs to face. Perhaps Me Too is just the beginning, and we will start to see more hashtags addressing these issues in the future. So ingredient number 1, our first 2 sentences, we've got like this synthesis summary happening. Then ingredient number 2, we've answered that question of what other problems are related to this. We're talking about now freedom of speech and patriarchal political systems. So kind of adding complexity to this issue and seeing how it relates to other issues in society. And then we used ingredient number 4. We made a future prediction. And we use the word perhaps to kind of soften our prediction. We did not say that we will definitely start to see more hashtags. We said, perhaps we will start to see more hashtags. And our last sample conclusion comes from an essay written on the topic of gender-neutral bathrooms. It says, it is fascinating how much tension and controversy can surround something as mundane as a bathroom stall. However, the bathroom bill is more about restrooms. It is about gender equality, respect, and treating others with decency. Although this issue may not appear to affect everyone directly, it is important to consider how little effort it would take to make a whole community feel included and comfortable. And when everybody in society feels this way, we are all better off. So we start off with ingredient number 1. We have our summary, our synthesis. What is the big picture? All of the above that I just said is interesting. We only used one sentence. We didn't laundry list everything that I already said. Then we go on to ingredient number 2. We say, why is this important and what other issues are related to this? Gender equality, respect, and treating others with decency. And number 3 kind of combines ingredients 2 and 3. We say why it's important, who is affected by this, and then also how we should view it. And then we use ingredient number 4, looking to the future with a factual conditional. When everybody in society feels this way, we are all better off. All right, well, there you have it. 6 ingredients to help you develop your own unique and thoughtful conclusion instead of always relying on that 5-paragraph template. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, make sure you like it, subscribe to my channel, and click that notification bell so that YouTube will notify you whenever I post a new video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something new, and happy writing. I will see you next time. Bye.